Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon.
Pumped up on Mars, juice, and ketamine.
He is the Thomas Edison plus of our age.
Probably his whole life is from a position of insecurity. I feel for the guy.
I would say 98% really appreciate what he does, but those 2% that are nasty, they are out there in full force.
We are meant for great things in the United States of America, and Elon reminds us of that.
I'm very disappointed in Elon. I've helped Elon a lot.
Hey, David Papadopoulos here, host of Elon Inc. So today we've got the last installment of our Summer Jealousy series, and we're going out with a bang. Elon Inc. stalwart Dana Hull interviewed Kirsten Grind of the New York Times about the great piece that she co-bylined back in the spring on Musk's growing drug habit on the campaign trail last year. Now, there was, Kirsten reported, lots of ketamine, ecstasy, shrooms, and a daily medication box stuffed with all sorts of pills. Now, we should note, Musk has maintained in the past that beyond a medical prescription for ketamine, he doesn't enjoy recreational drugs. And then after the Times ran its story, he posted on social media that he does not use drugs. Okay, let's dive in. Enjoy the interview.
Well, Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us again. We have this thing here at Bloomberg called the Jealousy List, where, we periodically talk about all the great investigative stories and features that we wish that we ourselves had landed. And of course, whenever I see your byline, my heart goes into my throat because I'm like, what does she have this time? And then lo and behold, in May, I wake up and I see your piece about Elon Musk and ketamine use and psychedelic mushrooms and allegations that he was using these drugs while he was on the campaign trail for President Trump. And I guess my first question is, your brand as a journalist is kind of about being the drug reporter of Silicon Valley. Could you talk a bit about how that came to be? I know you wrote a previous book about the former CEO of Zappos, but how did drug use in Silicon Valley become your specialty?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Dana. And I love that question for sure. I like to joke that if you're doing drugs in Silicon Valley, I will find you. It's funny, I got on that coverage area. It actually really started by covering billionaires and the wealthy, because those unfortunately or fortunately, I guess, go kind of hand in hand. Before I was at the New York Times, I was at the Wall Street Journal, and there I covered, as you mentioned, the entrepreneur Tony Hsieh, who is the big Las Vegas developer and CEO of Zappos, and he had a very big ketamine problem that went untreated and unfortunately died very young. And then from there, I don't know if you remember when the tech executive Bob Lee died on the streets of San Francisco. So my colleagues at the Journal and I jumped in there. And again, drugs ended up being a big part of that story. And he was involved in this kind of underground drug world. And so I have just kind of accumulated, I guess you could say, a lot of sources and people who know a lot about the drug scene and the party scene here in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. And it's funny because I am the most boring person ever. I have 2 kids. I live in a house. I am not going out to these parties. But yeah, I just have sort of landed on that beat, I guess you could say.
It's a great beat. I mean, it's the beat that keeps on giving, right?
It's definitely the beat that keeps on giving, for sure.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, because, what I've noticed is that, I feel like in New York and Washington, D.C., a lot of commerce and a lot of socializing is very much fueled by alcohol. Then I moved to California and I was like, oh, people here don't really seem to drink that much, but woo, there is a lot of drug use and very casual. And then now it's almost as the window has moved and marijuana is more accepted, you're seeing people funding psychedelic research and psychedelic institutes. And, it's just doing psychedelics of all kinds is widely accepted. There's Burning Man culture, but it's really shifted in a way.
Yeah. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up because when I first kind of got into this a few years ago, that was one of the most challenging things for me to figure out was that there were actually two tracks, especially with psychedelics like ketamine that acts like a psychedelic or magic mushrooms or any of the others, is that there is a track where there is serious research going on and companies studying these drugs to see how they can help with depression or PTSD. And then there's the track of, here I am at a party taking like 7 tabs of LSD or something like that, right? So the problem is in that gray area in between. That's the problem you see a lot in Silicon Valley and elsewhere is, of course, everyone out here, right? All these tech guys think they can disrupt everything and they want to also disrupt their health. And so they kind of think they can medicate themselves a lot of the times. That's what I saw a lot with Tony Hsieh. You know, he was suffering from depression and other issues. And he thought, well, I can just treat myself with ketamine, right? And that's what you continue to see is a lot of people thinking they can just do it themselves. When really, for that to work, you need to be with a doctor. You need to be having an administered dose. You need to have a prescription. And instead, you're kind of getting people who are not using prescriptions and think they can solve it themselves.
Yeah. So your piece was super interesting because it talked about how Musk was not just using ketamine, but psychedelic mushrooms and ecstasy while he was on the campaign trail campaigning for President Trump. And then it said, you know, it wasn't clear whether that use continued once he became a special government employee with Doge. But, you know, we watched him do all kinds of things that seemed bizarre, from inauguration to being on the stage at CPAC with the chainsaw. And what I noticed when I was watching that was that Musk was wearing sunglasses. And then I went down this rabbit hole of like, is there like a link between ketamine use and pupils being dilated and sunglasses? And I was just curious if there is like, you know, I didn't read like all the deep papers, but was that a concern that was a potential sign of drug use then?
Well, people we had talked to had mentioned especially that CPAC event. So again, that's the one where he kind of came on stage and Javier Milei gave him a chainsaw and he was waving it around and talking very fast and kind of giggling at odd times and sometimes slurring his words. So we, of course, my colleague Megan Toohey and I looked into that episode as well because people like us were sort of saying, was that an example of him being on drugs? I will say I talked to people around that and they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary behind the scenes. This is the challenge of covering Elon Musk, as you know, which is that his baseline, as he himself has said, is fairly odd. And he's always been, you know, not a great public speaker. So it's always a little bit hard to tell, like, is this abnormal? And so in this reporting, including at the drug reporting I did on him with my colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, we really relied on others around him to tell us, does this seem unusual? We don't want to be the ones making that determination, obviously. And so in that CPAC moment, we definitely had people telling us this seems unusual. He's acting unusual. So that's as far as we got with that one.
Yeah. And again, to your point, like the Overton window for what is unusual for Musk is quite wide because he has acted unusual in many instances now. Like
that's exactly right. Exactly.
So, Kirsten, my recollection is that your story came out on a Friday morning, and then that afternoon, Musk was with Trump in the Oval Office, kind of having his farewell goodbye, and he had a black eye, and Trump gave him a key, and then he was asked quite specifically about your piece. So, were you watching that White House press conference live?
Oh, yeah, we were definitely watching for sure. So that was like at the end of May. The timing was completely coincidental. That was all kind of, these stories take a very long time because we obviously are fact checking to the 11th degree, seeking comment, all of this. going through our various editors. And so that was going on at the same time that all of this was kind of happening in Washington with Musk leaving Washington. And so basically, we learned there was a press conference that day. And we, of course, wanted to watch. And I think it was one of the first questions asked. And Elon immediately just didn't even let the reporter, if I recall correctly, ask the question. He kind of just brushed him off and then started saying something about this lawsuit involving not Elon, but the Pulitzer board and Trump. And he just kind of sidestepped the question.
Yeah.
Deflected, exactly. And so then Trump later that day was asked about it, I think as he was going somewhere, and said, "Oh, Elon's great. I don't really care. Nothing he does would bother me." But then what was interesting about the timing was then over the weekend, as you know, the whole situation between those two just evolved. And suddenly it seemed like the drug issue had been an issue for Trump that whole time. He just hadn't said anything about it.
Right. And then it got to the point, this was like a day that I was actually off of work, but that was when they had like the big meltdown back and forth, like Trump on Truth Social, Musk on X, and like Trump does not drink and has always had like an issue, I think, with substance abuse, or at least that's my understanding. But did Trump actually say something about it?
I don't believe Trump specifically addressed the drug issue anywhere, but all of a sudden, all these reports were coming out from like the Post, and even our reporters here at the Times were saying that one of the issues that led him to kind of part ways with Elon was this drug issue. Now, I think we still have no idea what Trump actually knew or saw or was just kind of told. I don't know. I will say that one thing that makes this reporting, not just on Elon, but drug reporting in general, very challenging is no one is just like at their desk, snorting cocaine, right? Like this is all happening in private. So it's very secret. It's not something that some White House aide is probably going to have seen out there, right?
It's not like Musk is on Air Force One and the concierge doctor like appears at his side with like a buffet table of recreational drugs. It's happening privately, but word gets around.
Yeah.
So after the big blow up, a lot of the great details in your piece were about, I loved the detail about the pillbox and someone traveling with his kind of dedicated pillbox, an aid of some kind. And then let's talk a little bit about how while all of this drug use is happening, it's overlapping with this just like incredible drama in his personal life with his partners and the mothers of his children. And as you and I have talked about before, like his obsession with fertility and his growing brood. People always ask me eternally, how many kids does he have? And I always say he has fathered 14 children that we know of. However, It sounds like there's like the Japanese pop star and like who knows how many others there are. But Ashley St. Clair, this is all happening simultaneously. She's obviously a big MAGA influencer. So I'm curious if you and Megan were like tracking the drug stuff as you learned about the other kid stuff, or were you sort of working on both simultaneously? Like, because it ended up being a really great overlap, capturing sort of his personal chaos.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you. We were definitely hearing kind of both things, right? And at some point, it occurred to us that these are kind of related and that it's just the chaos, right? And both of us, me and you, we've written about this fertility issue. And, I've written about like this compound he was trying to do in Texas and all of this for all these kids and the wives and the partners and all of this. And it's like at some point, especially when Ashley St. Clair revealed herself earlier this year online, that to me was when I was like, this feels like it's getting a little out of control for him. It's not just, I want to procreate and increase the fertility rates and I have a couple different partners. This is sort of like, oh, there's actually other secret women out there that we don't know about. And it seemed related to the intensity of his drug use that we were also kind of hearing about. And so that's why we ended up combining both those things, because his personal life just, yeah, like you said, seemed so chaotic at a time that he was really rising to political power.
Mm-hmm. That now he's sort of ostensibly left Washington. He is making a lot of pronouncements about how he's back, focused on his companies, 24/7, sleeping at the factories, like all in on Tesla and robotics, and Starship is going to fly again. What is your sense now about the drug use rumors now that he's out of Washington? Has it quieted down a bit? I mean, your piece published in late May, right? So it's a couple months later.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any updates?
Well, I wouldn't want to give anything away here yet, but I would say that on the company side with his drug use, it's been interesting. One thing we reported in that story that I thought personally was like almost the most interesting fact was that he was getting advanced warnings at SpaceX ahead of drug tests. And so that's a very big deal because SpaceX is a private company. It's a massive government contractor. You can't even basically take ibuprofen with a security clearance without reporting it to the government. Last year, my colleagues here and I reported on all these issues with Elon's security clearance and how they were not reporting his ketamine use to the government. And so now we have reported that he also was getting heads up ahead of these drug tests.
I'll also just note that you guys reached out to SpaceX for comment, right? And the company did not respond?
Yeah. And so it doesn't, to me, seem like the companies are taking it very seriously, at least from the reporting I've done. I've never heard of an internal investigation. I've never heard of any repercussions. That's not to say there haven't been any. Maybe I just have not heard about it, but it doesn't seem too much like anyone is doing anything either at SpaceX or Tesla, where again, board members have over the years known about it and just, nothing's really changed. So,
yeah, I mean, I remember way back in 2018 where he smoked pot with Joe Rogan openly on his podcast. And Rogan was like, are you sure you can do this? Are investors going to freak out? And Musk was like, oh, well, isn't it legal? And he sort of took this toke. And I was watching it thinking, okay, Tesla investors may or may not care, but my God, SpaceX is going to care and NASA is going to care and the Pentagon is going to care. And
yeah,
it was really surprising to me that he would take that risk given the security clearance and given SpaceX's role as such a significant government contractor.
And they did care, as you saw, right?
They did care.
Yeah, they came right in. They made them clean up their act. I've talked to a bunch of SpaceX employees about that time since, and, there was drug sniffing dogs in there. They really cracked down for at least a couple years. Mm-hmm. And then it's sort of unclear, what happened since then, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
For sure. The first half of 2025 was crazy for Elon Musk. He was running 5 companies, balancing all of these children and these multiple partners, very enmeshed with the government, basically camped out in either Washington, D.C. or Mar-a-Lago with President Trump. Now he's kind of pivoted, ostensibly left Washington, is back focusing on his companies. He just celebrated his 54th birthday. So here's a guy who's a Gen Xer, middle-aged. He's got a lot to do in the next several months with his companies. What do you sort of predict in terms of, his stress, and how he's going to manage this as we head into the midterms?
It kind of, to me, seems like he left a little bit defeated in a way. He is now back to the thing he was already doing. And, he's being paid essentially, right, to come back to his business empire, right? This new $29 billion pay package from Tesla, and he's back at SpaceX. He opened this Tesla diner. The whole thing a little bit feels like, okay, I'm back to where I was before, and he was already there. When you do some great achievement and then you feel like you should be moving forward, and instead you go back to what you once had. So I sort of see him like trying to do all these things. He's obviously throwing a ton of resources into XAI, his artificial intelligence startup, to beat Sam Altman at OpenAI. And he's moving forward on that. But I guess I feel like the enthusiasm seems a little forced to me. And again, this is just reading what he's posting on X and everything going on. So it'll be interesting to see like how he continues on with politics. I definitely think there's still an interest there. It's just where he sort of fits in is the question. And now, his approval rating is not great among either party because he alienated the liberals when he, became Trump's special advisor. And now he is not loved by a lot of Republicans either. So it'll be interesting to see what he does in the midterms for sure.
Yeah. I guess one final question about drug use in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So there's one school of thought that all of this is people basically self-medicating their own mental health issues. And Musk has certainly been very public and alluded to his own mental health issues, his highs, his lows, his depression. He's talked about red wine and Ambien. I mean, he has been very open about that. There's like another school of thought that's like people are all about trying to optimize, like this whole kind of trend in terms of health about like optimizing everything, like your diet, your exercise, your sleep, so that you can have like massive brain function and squeeze the most out of every minute. And for Musk, I mean, he schedules his time in these like increments that must be crazy given everything that he has to do, and yet like unwinds by playing video games for hours on end. When you think about his drug use, do you feel like it's self-medicating, or is it like he's trying to optimize his performance, or is it a combination of both?
I think it's probably a combination of both from what we've heard from people. Some of the pushback we get on the drug reporting is usually like, but he's doing so great. So like, let him just keep doing what he's doing, right? But I guess, I will never kind of get out of my head this experience I had when I was reporting on Tony Hsieh, to come back to that again, which I went to this very high-end rehab facility that deals a lot with billionaires and celebrities and others. And they said, listen, like there is no universe where someone is self-medicating that it's okay. Like that's never okay. Now, I'm not, of course, talking about Elon specifically here. I'm just saying generally. And so I just always have that in my head when I talk to people who are self-medicating or who think, like you're saying, they can optimize, which is kind of that whole like disrupting your health thing I mentioned, right? So I don't know. It's concerning. Yeah.
Yeah. And to your point, which I think you made in this story, like, everyone's like, well, he's doing so great. He's this once in a lifetime character. Just like, he's an adult. He can make his own decisions. Why are you being so school marmy about it? Stop clutching your pearls. But to your point, like, there are real health effects, which you saw with Tony Hsieh. I mean,
exactly. I mean, that's the big warning. And also, I think a lot about like, why do we care about someone's drug use, honestly? And I don't think that for the average person, we do care, right? But Elon Musk, let's just put aside that he's like one of the world's richest people. He's overseeing 6 companies. Just SpaceX alone, right? The government contract issue, that alone should be enough to like look into what drugs he is or isn't using, because those rules are very clear. They're black and white. There's no like, yeah, you can take a little ketamine on Friday. It's like, no, right? No drugs. And so he provides a really easy way for why this is an important area to look into. But ahead of everyone, I've looked into related to drugs, I'm always asking myself, like, why do we care about this? Because I'm not here to like out someone's occasional like mushroom use at a party. Like that's not the point of this, right? And also, I mean, he was in the White House, right? So there alone is like a reason to look into whatever is going on with him and what he's doing. And so he's an interesting figure, as you know.
Yeah. It's the beat that keeps on giving,
Exactly.
And sourcing is so hard and is so high, and it's one of the great challenges in investigative reporting. And I always am so proud of everyone who's on the beat. Like every time I see a scoop from a competitor, I'm just happy because I know how hard fought it is to get that. So congratulations. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
This episode was produced by Stacey Wong and edited by Anna Masarakis. Blake Maples handles engineering with help from Joyce Tang and Dave Purcell fact checks. Our supervising producer is Magnus Henriksen. The Elon Inc. theme is written and performed by Taka Yasuzawa and Alex Sugiura. Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts. A big thanks to our supporters Joel Weber and Brad Stone. I'm David Papadopoulos. If you have a minute, rate and review our show. It'll help other listeners find us. See you next week.